The steam whistle shrieked across the platform at Angels Camp, California, and Isabella Turner felt her knees buckle as she stepped down from the train into the blazing August heat of 1882. She had spent 3 weeks traveling from Boston, each day feeling progressively worse, but she had been determined to reach her destination and meet the man who had answered her advertisement for marriage. The world tilted sideways as her worn leather boots touched the wooden platform, and she clutched her carpet bag tighter, willing herself to stay upright even as fever burned through her body like wildfire. Isaac Owens stood near the station house, his weathered hat pulled low against the afternoon sun, scanning the arriving passengers with careful brown eyes that had learned to read both men and horses with equal precision. At 32 years old, he had built a modest but successful ranch in the foothills above Angels Camp, carving out a life from the gold country that had gone quiet since the rush of '49. He had never intended to seek a wife through correspondence, but loneliness had a way of changing a man's perspective during long winter nights when the only company was the howling wind and the lowing of cattle. He spotted her immediately, not because she matched the tintype photograph she had sent, though the delicate features and dark hair were unmistakable, but because she was clearly in distress. Her face had gone pale beneath the dust of travel, and she swayed on her feet like a sapling in a strong wind. Isaac moved forward instinctively, his long legs covering the distance between them in seconds, reaching her side just as her eyes rolled back and her knees gave way completely. "Madam," he called out, catching her before she could hit the rough planks of the platform. The carpetbag tumbled from her grip, spilling a few personal items that he paid no mind to as he gathered her into his arms. She was burning up with fever, her skin hot even through the layers of her traveling dress. Her bonnet had come loose, revealing hair damp with perspiration, and he could hear the shallow, labored quality of her breathing. "Someone fetch Doc Morrison," Isaac shouted to the small crowd that had gathered, but an older woman in a blue calico dress shook her head. "Doc's up in Murphy's tending to a mining accident. Won't be back until tomorrow at the earliest," she informed him, her expression troubled as she looked at the unconscious woman in his arms. Isaac made a split-second decision, the kind he had learned to trust during his years on the frontier. "I'm taking her to my ranch. She needs care now, not tomorrow." He looked down at the stranger in his arms, the woman who had traveled thousands of miles to become his wife, and felt something shift in his chest. He had expected nervousness, perhaps awkwardness, but not this immediate surge of protective instinct that made his jaw tighten with determination. The station master helped gather her scattered belongings and secured them along with a trunk that had been unloaded from the baggage car. Isaac carried Isabella to his wagon with careful steps, mindful of every jostle, and laid her gently on a bed of hay he quickly covered with his own coat to provide some cushioning. She murmured something incomprehensible, her head turning restlessly, and he touched her forehead briefly, confirming what he already knew. This was no simple fatigue from travel. This was serious illness. The ride to his ranch normally took 40 minutes, but Isaac pushed his horses harder than he liked, taking the turns in the dirt road with as much speed as he dared while trying to minimize the bumps that might cause her additional distress. The landscape rolled past in shades of gold and brown, the dry summer grass covering the hills like a blanket, while scattered oak trees provided islands of shade. His ranch sat in a small valley where a creek ran year-round, providing water for his cattle and the garden he had rather unsuccessfully attempted to maintain. The house itself was modest, a 4-room structure he had built with his own hands from lumber hauled up from the valley below. It had a solid roof, glass windows he was particularly proud of, and a stone fireplace that kept it warm during the winter months. It was not fancy, but it was sturdy and honest, much like the man who had built it. Isaac carried Isabella inside and laid her on his own bed, the best piece of furniture he owned, with a real mattress stuffed with corn husks and topped with quilts his mother had made before she passed. He stood for a moment, uncertain, then methodically began to work. He had nursed injured animals and even helped a fellow rancher through a bad bout of pneumonia once. He was not a doctor, but he understood the basics of fever and the need for fluids and rest. First, he built up the fire in the stove and set water to boil. Then he returned to her side and carefully removed her boots, noticing the worn soles and the careful stitching where they had been repaired multiple times. Her stockings were dusty, but mended with neat patches. These small details told him more about Isabella Turner than her letters had revealed. She was not a woman of means. She had come west not seeking adventure but survival, perhaps even escape. He unbuttoned the high collar of her traveling dress, his movements respectful but efficient, and loosened the restrictive clothing enough that she might breathe more easily. Her corset would need to be removed, but that was beyond his comfort, so he simply ensured nothing was cutting off her air. He dampened a cloth with cool water from his pump and began to carefully wipe her face, her neck, her wrists, trying to bring down the fever that raged through her small frame. Isabella's eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused and glassy with fever. "I am sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible, cracked from thirst and illness. "I tried to be presentable." "Hush now," Isaac said gently, surprised by the softness in his own voice. "You just rest. Everything else can wait." He held a cup of water to her lips, supporting her head as she took a few small sips before exhaustion claimed her again, and she slipped back into fevered sleep. For the rest of that day and through the long night that followed, Isaac kept vigil at her bedside. He had moved a chair from the kitchen and positioned it where he could easily reach her, and he maintained a constant rotation of cool cloths, changing them as soon as they grew warm from her fever. He coaxed water between her lips whenever she seemed even partially conscious, and he monitored her breathing, which sometimes grew alarmingly shallow. Around midnight, her fever spiked dangerously high, and she began to shake with chills despite the warmth radiating from her skin. Isaac made another decision that would have scandalized proper society, but seemed the only sensible course of action. He removed her dress entirely, leaving only her chemise, and wrapped her in damp sheets, a treatment he had seen used once during a fever epidemic. Then he sat beside her and kept watch, changing the sheets as they grew warm, speaking to her in low, steady tones even though she likely could not hear him. "You are going to be all right," he told her, as much to convince himself as to reach whatever part of her mind might be listening. "You did not come all this way to give up now. I know you are strong. I could tell from your letters. The way you wrote about wanting to build something new to have a fresh start. That takes courage, Miss Turner, more courage than most people have." As dawn broke through the window, painting the room in shades of rose and gold, Isabella's fever finally broke. The change was sudden, her body relaxing as the terrible tension left her muscles, and she fell into what appeared to be genuine sleep rather than fevered unconsciousness. Isaac slumped in his chair, exhausted but relieved, and allowed himself to close his eyes for just a moment. When he woke, the sun was well up, and he jerked upright, immediately checking on his patient. Isabella still slept, but her breathing was even and her color, while still pale, no longer had that frightening grayish tinge. He stood stiffly, his back protesting from the awkward position in the chair, and went to make coffee and something that might serve as invalid food. The ranch did not run itself, and he had animals that needed tending, but Isaac found himself reluctant to leave her alone for long. He did the most essential chores quickly, bringing the milk cow in, feeding the chickens, checking that his horse had water. His cattle were out on the range and would be fine for a day without him riding out to check on them. When he returned to the house, Isabella was still sleeping, and he took the opportunity to tidy up a bit, suddenly aware of how bare and masculine his home must appear. There were no curtains on the windows, no decorative touches of any kind. His dishes were mismatched, acquired piecemeal from various sources. His furniture was functional but rough. He had a single picture on the wall, a photograph of his parents taken before they had left Missouri to try their luck in California. His father had died in a mining accident when Isaac was 16, and his mother had followed from heartbreak 2 years later, leaving him alone to make his way in the world. He had done well enough, he supposed. The ranch was profitable in a modest way. He had money saved in the bank in town. He was respected by his neighbors and known as a man whose word was good. But looking at his home through a woman's eyes, or at least imagining what a woman might think, he realized how stark and lonely it appeared. Isabella woke in the early afternoon, her eyes opening slowly and focusing with difficulty on the unfamiliar surroundings. Isaac was at her side immediately, sitting on the edge of the bed with a cup of water ready. "Easy now," he said. "You have been very ill. You are at my ranch, a few miles outside of Angel's Camp. I am Isaac Owens." She looked at him for a long moment, taking in his sun-weathered face, his kind brown eyes, the strong hands that held the cup so carefully. "I remember the train station," she said slowly, her voice hoarse. "I remember falling. You have had a high fever for more than a day," he explained. "I brought you here when the doctor was not available. I hope you do not mind. It seemed the only sensible thing to do. You took care of me." It was not a question but a statement, and something in her eyes made his chest tighten unexpectedly. "I did what anyone would do," he replied, though they both knew that was not quite true. He helped her sit up enough to drink, then brought her some broth he had made from a chicken he had cooked that morning. She managed only a few spoonfuls before exhaustion claimed her again, but it was a start. Over the next 3 days, Isaac tended to Isabella with a patience and gentleness he had not known he possessed. He cooked simple meals and coaxed her to eat even when she had no appetite. He helped her sit up so her lungs would not become congested, supporting her weight as if she were made of glass. He read to her from the few books he owned, his deep voice stumbling occasionally over the more complex words but persistent nonetheless. He changed her bedding and brought her fresh nightclothes that he had purchased from the general store during a quick trip to town, trying not to think too hard about the knowing looks the shopkeeper's wife had given him. During those days, they talked in the quiet moments when she was awake and alert. Isabella told him about her life in Boston, about working as a seamstress in a factory where the hours were long and the pay barely enough to cover rent in a boarding house. She spoke of a sister who had died of consumption 2 years earlier, leaving Isabella alone in the world with no family and few prospects. "I saw your advertisement in a newspaper someone had left at the boarding house," she explained, her voice growing stronger each day. "I must have read it a dozen times before I found the courage to respond. A part of me could not believe that a man would truly want a wife sight unseen, that it was not some kind of trick or trap." "I suppose it does seem strange," Isaac acknowledged. He was sitting in his chair beside the bed, mending a bridle with practiced hands while they talked. "But out here, there are not many women, and those who are here are already spoken for. I am not getting any younger, and the thought of spending the rest of my life alone started to weigh on me more than my pride." "Your letters were kind," Isabella said softly. "You wrote about the land, about the sky at night, about wanting someone to share the work and the life with. You did not make grand promises or claim to be something you were not. That honesty meant everything to me." Isaac looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw past the illness to the woman underneath. She had fine features, delicate but not weak, and eyes that held intelligence and determination. Her dark hair, now clean and brushed, fell past her shoulders in waves. She was pretty, he realized, but more than that, there was a quality about her that drew him, a strength wrapped in softness that called to something deep in his chest. "I am glad you came," he said simply. "Even under these circumstances, I am glad you are here." A faint blush colored her cheeks, the first real color he had seen there since she arrived. "I must look a fright," she murmured, suddenly self-conscious. "You look like someone who has been fighting off a fever and winning," he replied. "That is nothing to be ashamed of." "You are stronger than you think, Miss Turner." "Isabella," she corrected gently. "If we are to be married, I think you should call me Isabella." "Isabella," he repeated, liking the sound of it, "and you should call me Isaac." By the end of the week, Isabella was able to sit up for longer periods and even managed to walk from the bed to the chair by the window, though the effort left her shaky and breathless. Isaac stayed close, ready to catch her if she stumbled, and when she sank into the chair with a triumphant smile, he felt absurdly proud of her accomplishment. She looked out the window at the land that rolled away in gentle hills, at the oak trees scattered across the golden grass, at the mountains visible in the distance. "It is beautiful," she said with genuine wonder. "Your letters described it, but seeing it is something else entirely." "Wait until you are strong enough to go outside properly," Isaac said. "The creek is just beyond that far barn. There are deer that come down to drink at dawn and sometimes in the evening, and the stars at night are like nothing you have ever seen in a city." "I want to see it all," Isabella said, and there was something fierce in her voice, a determination that made Isaac smile. As she recovered, they fell into a comfortable routine. Isaac would rise early to tend the animals and do the essential ranch work, then return to make breakfast for both of them. Isabella's appetite improved daily, and she began to insist on helping despite her weakness. At first, it was small things like folding the dish towels or mending some of his worn shirts. Then she graduated to peeling vegetables while sitting at the table and giving advice on his cooking techniques that vastly improved the meals. They talked constantly, learning each other in a way that Isaac suspected many married couples never bothered to do. He learned that Isabella had a gift for mathematics and had kept the books for the seamstress shop until the owner's son took over and decided a woman was not suited for such work. He learned that she loved to read, that she had a quick wit and a laugh that came more easily as her strength returned. He learned that she was both practical and a secret romantic, that she dreamed of having a garden and maybe chickens of her own to tend. She learned that Isaac was quieter than his letters had suggested, more comfortable with actions than words, but that when he did speak, he meant what he said. She learned that he had a deep respect for the land and the animals in his care, that he was scrupulously fair in his dealings with others, and that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. She learned that he was lonely in ways he probably did not even realize, that this isolated life he had built was both a source of pride and a kind of prison. 2 weeks after her arrival, Isabella was finally well enough to venture outside. Isaac offered his arm, and she took it gratefully, still not entirely steady on her feet after so long in bed. The afternoon sun was warm but not oppressive, and a breeze carried the scent of dry grass and dust, and something indefinably wild that Isabella decided she liked. He walked her slowly around the immediate area, showing her the barn where he kept his horses, the chicken coop, the milk cow's pen, and the small structure he used for storage. Everything was well maintained and orderly, speaking to the methodical nature of the man beside her. When they reached the creek, Isabella gasped with delight at the ribbon of water cutting through the land, lined with willows and cottonwoods that provided blessed shade. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the water. "Of course," Isaac replied, helping her down the slight bank to where the creek burbled over smooth stones. Isabella knelt carefully and dipped her hands into the water, sighing with pleasure at the coolness of it. She splashed some on her face, not caring that she was probably ruining what remained of her complexion, and laughed with pure joy. Isaac found himself staring at her, at the way the dappled sunlight filtered through the leaves and played across her hair, at the genuine happiness in her expression, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. He had agreed to a practical arrangement, a marriage of convenience that would benefit them both. But watching Isabella by the creek, seeing her delight in this simple moment, Isaac realized with startling clarity that he wanted more than practicality. He wanted to see that smile every day. He wanted to hear that laugh echo through his house and make it a home. He wanted, quite simply, her. The realization should have terrified him, but instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, as inevitable as the sunrise. "What are you thinking?" Isabella asked, looking up at him with curious eyes. Isaac, never one for flowery speeches, decided to risk honesty. "I am thinking that I am very glad you stepped off that train," he said. "Even if you did immediately fall into my arms, perhaps especially because of that." Isabella blushed, but she held his gaze. "I am glad too," she admitted, "though I wish our first meeting had been less dramatic. I had hoped to make a good impression." "You have made an impression," Isaac assured her, "just perhaps not the one you planned." They sat by the creek for a while, talking about nothing and everything, until Isabella began to tire, and Isaac insisted on walking her back to the house. She did not argue, leaning on his arm more heavily than she had on the way out, and Isaac matched his pace to hers, patient and steady. That evening, as they sat together after dinner, Isabella brought up the subject they had both been carefully avoiding. "We should discuss the marriage," she said, her hands folded primly in her lap despite the nervousness in her eyes. "I am well enough now that we could go into town and see the minister whenever you wish. I know that was our agreement." Isaac set down the harness he had been oiling and looked at her carefully. "Is that what you want?" he asked. "I came here to marry you," Isabella replied, but there was a question in her voice. "That is not what I asked," Isaac said gently. "I know what our arrangement was, but things have changed, Isabella. You have been ill, and I have been taking care of you, and we have spent more time together in these 2 weeks than many couples do in months of formal courting. I need to know what you want now, not what you agreed to in a letter months ago." Isabella looked down at her hands, and when she spoke, her voice was soft but clear. "I want to stay," she said. "I want to marry you, Isaac Owens, not because I have nowhere else to go, though that is still true, but because in these weeks I have come to care for you. You have been kinder to me than anyone in my life. You have seen me at my absolute worst, and you have not turned away. You have been patient and gentle, and you have made me laugh even when I felt terrible. I think I could be happy here with you if you still want me." Isaac crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his calloused ones. "I want you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I want you more than I knew it was possible to want someone. These weeks have been the best of my life, even with the worry and the sleepless nights. You have already made this house feel different, feel lived in and cared for. I think I am falling in love with you, Isabella Turner, and I would be honored if you would be my wife." Tears welled in Isabella's eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Isaac stood and gently pulled her up with him, and for the first time he kissed her. It was soft and careful, mindful of her recent illness and the newness between them, but it held promise and warmth and the beginning of something real. They were married 3 days later in the small church in Angel's Camp, with the minister's wife and the shopkeeper standing as witnesses. Isabella wore a dress she had modified from one in her trunk, adding lace at the collar and cuffs with her skilled seamstress hands. Isaac wore his best suit, which he had owned for years but rarely had occasion to use, and he had gotten a proper haircut in town that made him look almost civilized. The ceremony was simple and brief, but when Isaac slipped a gold band on Isabella's finger and promised to love and cherish her for the rest of his days, he meant every word with an intensity that surprised him. And when Isabella made her own vows, looking up at him with shining eyes, he knew she meant them too. They returned to the ranch as husband and wife, and that night, Isaac carried Isabella over the threshold of their home with all the traditional ceremony, making her laugh and protest that she was perfectly capable of walking. But he insisted, and when he set her down in the bedroom that was now truly theirs, the laughter faded into something softer and more serious. Isaac had moved his things into the smaller bedroom during her illness, wanting to give her privacy and space to recover. But now he carefully carried them back, Isabella helping to arrange his few possessions alongside her own. It was a small thing, this mingling of belongings, but it felt significant, a physical representation of two lives becoming one. That night, they came together with tenderness and care, Isaac mindful of her recent illness and wanting everything to be right for her. Isabella, despite her limited experience, responded to his gentleness with a passion that surprised them both. And afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Isaac held her close and marveled at how quickly his life had changed. "I never imagined it could be like this," Isabella whispered against his chest. "The marriage manuals I read made it sound so clinical, so dutiful." Isaac chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Well, duty might be part of marriage, but I hope this particular aspect remains much more than that." Isabella swatted his shoulder playfully, then snuggled closer. "I love you," she said, the words still new and a little frightening in their intensity. "I know it has not been long, but I do." "I love you, Isaac. I love you too," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "More than I knew I could love anyone. You have turned my entire world around, Isabella Owens." She sighed contentedly at the sound of her new name. "Say it again." "Isabella Owens," he repeated dutifully, hearing the smile in his own voice. "I like the sound of that," she murmured, already drifting toward sleep. "So do I," Isaac agreed softly. "So do I." The weeks that followed were a period of adjustment and discovery for them both. Isabella threw herself into making the house a home, starting with curtains for the windows that she sewed from fabric purchased in town. She rearranged furniture, added small touches like wildflowers in a jar on the table, and organized the kitchen in a way that made actual sense. Isaac watched these transformations with bemused pleasure, realizing that he had been living in a house but she was creating a home. She also took over the cooking entirely, much to Isaac's relief and his stomach's gratitude. Isabella might have worked in a factory, but she had learned to cook from her mother and sister, and her meals were hearty and flavorful, a far cry from Isaac's utilitarian approach to food. She baked bread that filled the house with yeast and warmth, made stews that actually had vegetables in proper proportion, and could somehow make even simple eggs into something special. For his part, Isaac began teaching Isabella about ranch life. She learned to milk the cow, though the beast was stubborn and seemed to sense her nervousness. She gathered eggs from chickens that she quickly named and began to treat as pets, much to Isaac's amusement. He showed her how to recognize which plants were edible and which were poisonous, how to read the weather by the clouds and the behavior of animals, how to ride a horse with enough competence to get from one place to another if needed. Isabella proved an eager student, soaking up information like the dry earth soaked up rain. She asked endless questions, her quick mind making connections that sometimes surprised Isaac with their insights. She was not content to simply live on the ranch. She wanted to understand it, to be a true partner in its operation. One evening, about a month after their wedding, Isabella presented Isaac with a ledger book she had purchased in town. "I have been thinking," she said, settling at the table with a purposeful air that he was learning meant she had a plan. "You mentioned that you keep track of your cattle and your expenses in your head, but I think we could do better with a proper system. If we track everything carefully, income and expenditures, we can see patterns and make better decisions about when to sell, what to buy, where we might expand." Isaac looked at the ledger, then at his wife's excited face and felt his heart swell with pride. "That is a fine idea," he said. "I am not much for bookkeeping, but I think you would be excellent at it." "I loved keeping the books at the dress shop," Isabella admitted. "It was the one part of the job where I felt truly skilled. And I think I could help here, really help, not just with cooking and cleaning but with the business side of things." "Then it is yours to manage," Isaac decided immediately. "I will tell you everything about the stock, the prices, the deals I have made, and you can organize it however makes sense to you. We are partners, Isabella. Your ideas and skills are just as valuable as mine." She beamed at him, and Isaac knew he had said exactly the right thing. Over the following weeks, Isabella threw herself into organizing the ranch's finances with the same enthusiasm she had brought to organizing the house. She rode out with Isaac to count cattle, making careful notes. She negotiated with the shopkeeper in town for better prices on supplies, using her charm and her sharp mind to secure deals that left Isaac shaking his head in admiration. She identified ways they could save money in areas where spending a bit more might yield better returns. But it was not all work. They also found time for pleasure, for getting to know each other beyond the practicalities of daily life. Isaac took Isabella riding up into the foothills, showing her vistas that stretched for miles, teaching her the names of the mountains in the distance. They had picnics by the creek, where Isabella would read aloud from books while Isaac listened with his head in her lap. They attended a barn dance in town, where Isaac proved to be a surprisingly good dancer, and Isabella laughed with delight as he spun her around the floor. They also faced challenges together. A late summer storm brought flash flooding that threatened the creek crossing, and they worked side by side through the night to move the animals to higher ground and secure anything that might wash away. A neighbor's fence broke, and his cattle mixed with Isaac's herd, requiring days of patient work to sort out whose animals were whose. The milk cow developed an infection that required careful nursing and cost them several weeks of production. Through it all, they supported each other, their partnership growing stronger with each challenge met and overcome. Isaac found that having Isabella to talk things through with made difficult decisions easier, her perspective often revealing angles he had not considered. Isabella discovered that she was stronger and more capable than she had ever imagined, that the life she had feared might be too hard was actually deeply satisfying in ways her factory work had never been. As autumn arrived and the hills turned from gold to brown, Isabella realized that she had not had her monthly courses since before leaving Boston. She waited another week to be certain, then chose a quiet evening when they were sitting together after dinner to tell Isaac. "I think I am with child," she said simply, watching his face carefully for his reaction. Isaac's eyes went wide, and for a moment he simply stared at her. Then a slow smile spread across his face, transforming his usually serious expression into something radiant. "Truly?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I am fairly certain," Isabella confirmed. "It is still early, but all the signs are there." Isaac crossed to her and pulled her into his arms, holding her gently but firmly. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby." "Isabella, that is the best news I've had in my entire life, excepting the day you agreed to marry me." She laughed, relieved and happy at his reaction. "I was hoping you would be pleased. I know we have not been married long, and perhaps it is sooner than ideal for starting a family." "It is perfect," Isaac said firmly. "You are perfect. Everything about this is perfect." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and into winter. Isabella continued her work around the ranch, though Isaac became increasingly protective, insisting she not lift anything heavy or do anything he deemed too strenuous. She tolerated his concern with good humor, understanding it came from love even when it verged on the excessive. They prepared for the baby's arrival with care and excitement. Isaac built a cradle from oak wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk and carving simple designs into the headboard. Isabella sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her skilled fingers creating beautiful things from simple fabric. They turned the smaller bedroom into a nursery, painting the walls and adding a rug to keep the floor warm. Winter in the California foothills was mild compared to the Boston winters Isabella remembered. But there were still cold nights when frost covered the ground and they huddled close to the fireplace. On those nights, Isaac would place his hand on Isabella's growing belly and feel their child move beneath his palm, a sensation that never failed to fill him with awe. "What do you hope for?" Isabella asked one such night. "A boy or a girl, healthy," Isaac replied immediately. "That is all I care about. Healthy baby, healthy wife. Everything else is just details." "But if you had to choose," Isabella pressed, curious. Isaac considered. "A boy would be helpful on the ranch eventually," he admitted. "But a girl would be wonderful too. I think I would like a daughter with your brains and determination. She would probably end up running the whole territory." Isabella laughed, pleased. "I hope for a boy who has your steadiness and your kind heart," she said. "Though honestly, like you, I mostly just hope for healthy." The baby arrived in early spring, on a warm April morning when the hills were covered in wildflowers and the air smelled of new growth. Isabella's labor was long but not complicated, attended by the doctor from Angel's Camp and the minister's wife, who had experience with birthing. Isaac paced outside for hours, unable to stay still, jumping at every sound from the bedroom. When the baby's cry finally rang out, strong and lusty, Isaac felt his knees go weak with relief. The minister's wife opened the door a few minutes later, smiling broadly. "You have a son, Mr. Owens. A big, healthy boy. And your wife did splendidly." Isaac rushed inside to find Isabella propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face and held out the baby. "Meet your son," she said softly. Isaac took the infant with trembling hands, struck by how small and perfect he was. The baby had a shock of dark hair, a red, wrinkled face, and tiny fists that waved in the air. "He is beautiful," Isaac said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are beautiful. You did so well, Isabella. I am so proud of you." They named him Thomas after Isaac's father, with a middle name of James for Isabella's father who had died when she was young. Thomas Owens proved to be a healthy, hungry baby who slept reasonably well and seemed content to be passed between his parents or tucked in his cradle. The months following Thomas's birth were exhausting but joyful. Isaac took over even more of the household chores, so Isabella could rest when the baby slept, and he proved surprisingly adept at soothing Thomas when he fussed. Neighbors came to visit and meet the new baby, bringing gifts and advice in equal measure. The minister's wife became a particular friend to Isabella, and their families began to socialize regularly. As Thomas grew from infant to baby to toddler, the ranch continued to prosper under Isaac and Isabella's combined management. They expanded their herd gradually, always cautious not to overextend, and Isabella's careful bookkeeping meant they always knew exactly where they stood financially. They added a room onto the house, giving them space for Thomas, and they hoped, future children. Isabella had indeed been pregnant again when Thomas was 18 months old, and their second child, a daughter they named Sarah, arrived without complication. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's brown eyes, and she proved to be a quieter baby than Thomas, content to observe the world with solemn attention. The years passed in the way they do on a successful ranch, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of children and cattle. Thomas grew into a sturdy boy who followed his father everywhere, learning ranch skills almost by osmosis. Sarah proved to have her mother's quick mind and her father's patience, equally happy helping Isabella in the garden or watching Isaac work with the horses. When Thomas was 7 and Sarah was 5, a third child arrived, another son they named Michael. By then, Isaac and Isabella had been married for 8 years, and the awkward mail-order bride and lonely cowboy they had been seemed like different people entirely. They had become a true partnership, anticipating each other's thoughts, supporting each other's dreams, and building a life that was far richer than either had imagined possible. The ranch expanded over the years to include sheep as well as cattle, Isabella's idea based on careful analysis of market trends. They built a proper barn to replace the aging structure Isaac had built when he first started. They hired a young man from town to help with the heavy work, allowing Isaac to focus more on the business side of things and to spend more time with his growing family. Through it all, the love between Isaac and Isabella deepened and matured. The passionate attraction of their early days remained, but it was now layered with profound respect, unshakable trust, and the deep affection that comes from truly knowing another person. They had seen each other through good times and bad, through illness and health, through worry and joy, and their bond had only grown stronger. On their 10th anniversary, Isaac gave Isabella a gift he had been planning for months. It was a book, custom made by a printer in Sacramento, and when she opened it and saw what it was, she gasped with delight. He had taken all of her letters to him from before they married, the ones she had written from Boston, and had them bound in leather with gold lettering that read the beginning of our story. "I saved every one," Isaac explained, suddenly shy. "I would read them over and over before you arrived, trying to imagine the woman behind the words. I thought you might like to have them, to remember where we started." Isabella threw her arms around his neck, the book clutched in one hand. "It is perfect," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Absolutely perfect. Thank you, Isaac. Thank you," he replied, holding her close, "for taking a chance on a lonely cowboy, for stepping off that train even though you were sick, for choosing me, for loving me, for building this life with me. Every day with you is a gift, Isabella." She pulled back to look at him, seeing the lines that time and sun had added to his face, the gray that was starting to appear at his temples, the calluses on his hands from a lifetime of hard work. And she thought about the scared, sick woman she had been, stepping off a train into an uncertain future, and how that cowboy had caught her when she fell and had been catching her ever since. "I would do it all again," she said firmly. "Every single moment. You saved my life that day, Isaac Owens, in more ways than one. And I love you more now than I did the day we married, which I would not have thought possible." They kissed in the golden afternoon light, two people who had found each other across impossible distance and built something lasting and true. Around them, their ranch hummed with life and productivity. Their children played in the yard, and the future stretched ahead full of promise and possibility. That evening, they gathered the children for a special dinner, using the good dishes that Isabella had purchased over the years and cooking Thomas's favorite meal. After they ate, they all went outside to watch the sunset, something they did most evenings when weather permitted. Thomas, now 10 years old and already showing signs of becoming as tall as his father, stood close to Isaac, asking questions about which cattle would be ready for market in the fall. Sarah, at 8, was showing her mother a flower she had found and wondering if they could plant seeds from it in the garden. Michael, now 3, sat on Isaac's shoulders, his small hands buried in his father's hair, perfectly content to watch the world from that elevated perch. Isabella leaned against Isaac's side, his free arm coming around her automatically, and looked at the life they had created together. The house that had been just walls and roof was now filled with laughter and love. The land that had been lonely now supported a family. The future that had once seemed so uncertain was now as solid as the ground beneath their feet. "Happy anniversary," she said softly, meant only for Isaac's ears. "Happy anniversary," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Here is to many more." As the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold, painting the hills in shades of fire, the Owens family stood together, watching the day end and knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys in equal measure. And that, they both agreed silently, was exactly what they wanted. A life lived fully together in the beautiful wild country they called home. Years continued to pass, each one adding layers to their story. Thomas grew into a fine young man who proved to have his father's way with animals and his mother's head for business. At 18, he began courting a girl from a neighboring ranch, and Isaac and Isabella watched with bittersweet pleasure as their oldest prepared to start his own life. Sarah developed into a young woman of remarkable intellect, determined to become a teacher, despite the challenges that career presented for women in rural California. Isabella supported her daughter's ambitions fiercely, seeing in Sarah the opportunities she herself had never had. Isaac, after initial hesitation about his daughter moving away to attend normal school, came around when he saw how important it was to her. Michael, growing up with the benefit of 2 older siblings and parents who had learned from raising them, was turning into an easygoing boy who loved the ranch life and showed no inclination to seek anything else. He had his father's quiet way and his mother's observation skills, able to spot a sick animal or a brewing problem before anyone else noticed. More children came, 2 more daughters named Rose and Margaret, spacing out over the years until Isaac and Isabella had 5 children in total. The house expanded again to accommodate them all, and Isabella often joked that she had gone from being alone in the world to being surrounded by family in the span of less than 2 decades. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful in the region. Other ranchers would come to Isaac for advice, and to Isabella for help organizing their finances. They became pillars of the community, trusted and respected. They donated to build a proper schoolhouse in Angel's Camp and contributed to the church building fund. They were known as fair employers and good neighbors, always ready to help when trouble came calling. But through all the success and the busyness of raising a large family and running a prosperous ranch, Isaac and Isabella never lost sight of what mattered most: each other. They made time for quiet evenings together after the children were in bed. They still took rides up into the hills when they could, though often now with children in tow. They still talked for hours about everything and nothing. The passion between them never dimmed, and the love only grew deeper with each passing year. On their 20th anniversary, their children threw them a party that brought together friends and neighbors from across the county. There was dancing and music, food and laughter, and heartfelt speeches about the couple who had built such a remarkable life together. Thomas, now a married man himself with a baby on the way, gave a toast that had everyone reaching for handkerchiefs. "My parents taught us what love looks like," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "Not the easy kind of love, but the kind that shows up every day, the kind that works hard and sacrifices willingly, the kind that supports and encourages and never gives up. My father caught my mother when she fell off a train 20 years ago, and he has been catching her ever since, and she has been catching him right back. That is what I want for my marriage, what I hope all of us can aspire to. So please raise your glasses to Isaac and Isabella Owens, the finest people I know." As everyone cheered and drank, Isaac and Isabella stood close together, their hands intertwined. They were older now, with gray in their hair and lines on their faces, but the way they looked at each other was unchanged from those early days when everything was new and uncertain. 20 years, Isabella marveled, her voice soft enough that only Isaac could hear over the celebration around them. "It seems impossible that it has been so long, and yet I cannot imagine life any other way. 20 years since you stepped off that train, sick as a dog, and proceeded to turn my entire world upside down," Isaac agreed with a smile. "Best thing that ever happened to me, Isabella, best thing by far." "I love you," she said, the words as fresh and genuine as they had been the first time she said them. "I love you too," Isaac replied. "Always have, always will." They danced together as the evening progressed, moving in the easy synchronization of two people who had spent decades learning each other's rhythms. Their children watched with affection, their friends watched with admiration, and Isaac and Isabella simply existed in their own world for a few precious moments, grateful beyond measure for the life they had built. As the years continued to roll forward, Isaac and Isabella grew old together with the same grace and partnership they had brought to everything else in their lives. They watched their children grow, marry, and have children of their own. They saw the ranch pass gradually into Thomas's capable hands while still remaining involved and valued. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents, their family tree spreading wide and strong. Through it all, through the joys and the sorrows, through the triumphs and the losses, through every season of life, Isaac and Isabella remained each other's constant. They sat together on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set over the hills they had called home for so long. They told their grandchildren stories about the old days, when California was still young and wild. They took comfort in the simple pleasure of each other's presence, and when they were both old and tired, having lived full lives rich with love and purpose, they went to sleep one night in the bed they had shared for more than 50 years and simply did not wake up. They left together, as they had done everything, side by side. Their funeral brought the entire county together to mourn and celebrate 2 lives well lived. Their children stood strong, supporting each other through grief. secure in the knowledge that their parents had loved them beyond measure and had given them every tool needed to build good lives of their own. The ranch continued under family ownership, a lasting legacy to the mail-order bride and the cowboy who had built something remarkable from nothing but determination and love. In the family plot on a hill overlooking the ranch, under an oak tree that had been a sapling when they first married, Isaac and Isabella were buried side by side. Their shared headstone was simple, bearing their names, their dates, and a single line that their children chose together. He caught her when she fell, and they never let go. It was the perfect summary of a love story that had begun with a sick woman stepping off a train and a cowboy who carried her home, and that had lasted through every season, every challenge, every joy. A love story that proved that sometimes the best things in life come from taking a chance, from being brave enough to seek something better, and from finding someone who will catch you when you fall and tend to you with care until you are strong enough to stand, and then stand beside you as an equal partner for the rest of your days. The ranch still stands today, passed down through generations of Owens' descendants, a testament to what two people can build when they combine their strengths and commit to supporting each other through everything life throws their way. And on quiet evenings, when the light slants golden across the hills and the breeze whispers through the oak trees, you can almost imagine you see them there still. A cowboy and his bride, walking hand in hand through the land they loved, together for all eternity just as they had been in life.